He's with Master G Communications. He's been working over 15 years in cybersecurity. He's not only is he a security ninja, he's a real-life ninja, and you may recognize him from the televisions. If you've seen American Ninja Warrior, yeah, he's done it. He has done an actual Ninja Warrior. You can find him on the YouTubes.
Make a couple adjustments right here. So thanks for that warm welcome. And it is true, one of my hobbies is American Ninja Warrior. It brings a little balance to my life. I've been on the show over the last couple of seasons. Do we have any Ninja Warrior fans here? You? Yeah. So if you want to talk Ninja, I'll be around for the after party, and you can all hang from some scaffolding somewhere, and then I'll answer all your Ninja Warrior questions. But today, I'm not here to talk about Ninja. I'm here to talk about this trendy thing we call data breaches. It's making the news lately. And more importantly, how we can learn from coyotes in our fight against this next generation of cybercrime. Does anyone have any coyotes living in their neighborhood? Couple. I see it popping up on social media all the time. About 100 years ago, coyotes and other predators were deemed a threat to the livelihood of ranchers in the US. And in response, the government created an extermination campaign that provided monetary rewards for the pelts of these predators. These bounty programs were put in place in hopes of culling the herd. But interestingly enough, while these programs worked fairly well on most predators, they had little to no impact on the coyote. In fact, the coyote population often increased as a result. The more aggressive man became at trying to control the coyote, the more their numbers grew and thrived over time. Coyotes are a small dog in a big dog world. And as I did my homework on this project, it became clear to me that these creatures are capable of adapting to any environment in many amazing ways. As we encroached their natural habitat, instead of being forced out, the coyotes adapted. We found they were capable of living and surviving in any environment that happens to grow up around them, including New York City. This is a coyote on top of a bar in New York City. Coyotes have evolved their ability to survive. When they feel threatened or persecuted as a species, they transform into a type of colonization mode, and their populations multiply exponentially. We can't control the coyote. Resistance is futile. We must figure out how to live and coexist with a coyote. And like coyotes, hackers are small dogs in a big dog world, continuously adapting to the ever-changing cyber landscape. Hackers have been around since the beginning, since the analog and digital technology revolution. They've been around since phreakers were mimicking phone tones to steal long distance. Does anyone remember those days? Some of us are old enough, I think. To the creation of modern-day malware, and even more recently, APT hacking kits. Hackers have adapted and overcome every new technology that has emerged to protect us over the past several decades. And there's no reason to believe that any of that is changing anytime soon. And as proof, let's go back a few years. 2013 was the first year of the mega breach. That's when there was a 62% increase in reported data breaches from the previous year. And it happened again the next year. And this was the year that we had our first 1 billion reported compromised records in a single year. And this slide always makes me laugh a little bit. This was the year data breaches got personal. This was also the year that breaches became sort of in the mainstream news, and you started hearing more about them. And then 2016 happened. IBM Security reported there was a 556% increase in reported data breaches from the previous year to exceed 4 billion. Think about that number for 1 second. 4 billion records. The total number of reported data breaches for 2016 exceeds nearly the entire online population. In other words, everybody in this room, your personal data was probably stolen in 2016. And oh, by the way, these metrics only reflect reported data breaches and don't account for any of the unreported breaches. And there's many more. If you subscribe to any threat intelligence or follow any threat intelligence service, those guys pay people to troll the dark web looking for stolen data, and there's plenty more out there that's never been reported. And here we are, 2017. I think I'm going to call this one the year of breach fatigue. It seems like every week there's a new one. These are just a few of the organizations that have been reported data breaches this year alone. And as you'll see, many of these are very well-resourced organizations, and they're still routinely getting breached. And even before the big Equifax breach, your personal data was likely already for sale on the dark web, but thanks to Equifax, it's virtually guaranteed now. Like the coyote population, the breach totals keep increasing every year despite constant improvements in modern cybersecurity technologies. But why is that? Before we answer why, I want to talk about what it really means to be breached. A breach isn't just the disclosure of information to an unauthorized party. The media loves talking about stolen data or ransomware when reporting on breaches, but there's far more to a breach than just stolen data. And so this is where I have to pause. Do we have any attorneys in the room? Good. This is because I got to put in a legal disclaimer. I am not an attorney. However, it's been brought to my attention that there's actually a legal definition for the term breach. In some states, it's more important than others. I've had a few spirited discussions with these attorneys over what an actual breach really is. And we end up agreeing to disagree, mostly because these attorneys aren't as technical as they think they are. In my opinion, if you have a compromised system of any kind, anywhere, connected to your network, you've been breached. So with a legal disclaimer out of the way, breaches, just like the Coyote Bounty Program, often have unforeseen consequences. And it doesn't matter how you were breached, whether Doug clicks on an email phishing campaign, or maybe one of his guys plugs in a USB drive to his local network, or a hacker comes in from the outside. It doesn't matter because there's always the potential for collateral damage. And I like to call this the breach ripple effect. Equifax is a great example that had many breach ripple effect variations. It started with them essentially handing over your personal financial information to cyber thieves. They essentially gave the keys to the kingdom, your social security numbers, your home address, your bank account information, date of birth, about you and your family to the cyber thieves, free of charge. If that wasn't bad enough, they also managed to botch every attempt at remedying the mess from the beginning, from waiting 6 weeks to even disclose the information, to high-level executives selling stock before making it publicly knowledgeable. And then, this is my favorite, they launched a sketchy named website and encouraged everyone to go check to see if they were compromised. And then shortly after that, from their official Twitter account, they tweeted a link to a rogue phishing website. Rogue phishing, they didn't even own the site, and encouraged everyone to enter in their personal information. They did pretty much everything wrong and will likely be used as a teaching tool and a case study for future breaches of what not to do. Now, while Equifax is a great example of the traditional breach that involves stolen data, I want to point out that one important breach fact that is often overlooked is not all breaches target your data. And one example that actually happened to me, and I'm from Dallas, by the way, happened to me in Dallas a few months ago. I was awakened in the middle of the night by emergency sirens. I woke up, I looked out the window, we had clear skies and otherwise perfect weather at the time. I was confused. As it turns out, a hacker had compromised the emergency communications system and activated all 156 sirens citywide, and it lasted for several hours. This, of course, triggered a ripple effect of people calling 911. And if you happen to be laying on the side of the road, dialing 911 with a life-threatening emergency, your call wasn't getting through. Because this ripple effect, people calling 911, burdened a already overstaffed call center. So data exfiltration is not required to make a dramatic and damaging impact on an organization. So whether the attack is against your infrastructure, such as a point-of-sale system being taken offline for a little while, or a simple denial service against a phone system, most organizations, this translates into lost revenue and increased costs. Quantifying these costs is fuzzy at best. Many organizations want to estimate the cost based on per record stolen on a given vertical. However, the formula for figuring out what it really costs is anything but straightforward. You'll have immediate costs, such as incident response, investigation, cleanup, but also long-term costs, such as auditing, loss of IP, legal fees, brand impact, and as I previously mentioned, potentially public safety. Not to mention, many breaches come with a scapegoat. I'm sure everyone noticed that shortly after Equifax announced their CTO and CIO resigned, and then a couple weeks later, the CEO has now also left the company. It's not a coincidence. Earlier this morning, you might have remember Omar talking about the global cost of cyber attacks. I want to take that one step further and talk about what it actually costs for a cyber attack against your business. Every year, the Ponemon Institute tries to figure out what that is. They interviewed over 1,200 companies that suffered cyber attacks in 2016. They estimated the annual cost of these companies was $9.5 million each. So who has $9 million of budget laying around to clean up after a cyber attack? Doug? Come on. And with that, many analysts are also predicting that global cost of cybercrime will rise up to as much as $6 trillion in just 3 short years. Just this June, global shipping company Maersk announced a loss of $300 million due to a malware attack that took them over 2 weeks to recover. So think about this for 1 second. They didn't have any data stolen. They didn't lose anything. It took them 2 weeks to recover, and they lost $300 million. I consider that a data breach. A couple of months ago, FedEx had to force the halt of their shares being traded on the stock market due to a company they acquired in Europe because they were under attack at that time. They were disrupted, their business was impacted, and they had to stop trading of shares on the stock market from an attack. Data wasn't stolen there either. Eventually, all businesses will be compromised. So this makes it really critical for decision makers to think through all these dimensions and risk when assessing the cost of the organization. Despite all this evidence, most companies greatly understate the importance and the risk of a cyber event. The most recent EY InfoSec survey that solicits feedback from executives, CISOs, IT leaders, like many of you in this room, revealed there's a huge disconnect between organizational strategy and cybersecurity function. 78% of those interviewed had no idea what the security implications were to their corporate strategy. 78%. They also discovered 9 out of 10 businesses failed to evaluate the financial impact of a cyber attack. It's crazy to me that people aren't even thinking about this stuff. These metrics also reminded me of a black hat briefing I went to with colleagues of Michelle. I don't know if Michelle's still in the room. The FBI, they talked about how they captured some credit card thieves. So while that particular story wasn't all that interesting to me. It was pretty standard. It was something you could have seen on Netflix. What was interesting to me, these cyber thieves, they were overseas. They had compromised a bunch of point-of-sale systems all across the US. And they were siphoning off credit card numbers. And eventually they were caught and they were put in jail. FBI did a postmortem of the entire operation. And they went back to some of these businesses to find out, what happened and how things were going. And they found that most of these businesses had shut their doors due to the damage that was caused from that cyber attack. If companies aren't identifying, understanding, and evaluating the impact of a cyber attack, the nature of the risk will remain unknown and understated. In order for us to understand the implications of a given cyber attack, it's important for us to understand the cyber threat landscape. But first, let's do a quick review of how that's evolved over the past few years. The profile was fairly simple, and I'm happy that Michelle's slide mimics this. It was simple: cybercrime, cyber espionage, and cyber hacktivism. And each of these categories required some level of sophistication and skills to actually be successful. Heck, when I was a kid, a hacker was just somebody sitting in the basement trying to have fun. And yes, that's what my first computer looked like. And no, that's not me with hair. But now both nation states and criminal organizations are recruiting and training smart people and paying them large sums of money to join them in their exploits. And since the release of the NSA hacking tools earlier this year, even low-level script kiddies have access to nation-state quality malware kits that are as easy to use as watching a how-to video on YouTube. This requires all of us as security experts to start thinking strategically while moving tactically. So what does all this mean? One strategy that I often recommend is to treat security like self-defense. Does anyone in here practice martial arts? Anybody? Few of us? No matter how good your defenses are, you will get hit. However, it is possible to minimize the damage you take when you do get hit. Something that I teach my karate students, which also applies to cybersecurity, is make an effort to identify what is not working for you and understand why. And then you either modify it or abandon it altogether. Finding what isn't working for you is often more valuable than knowing what is working for you. Learn from what is not working for you. So how does this apply to cyber? I'm glad you asked. First, let's take a look at what most companies are doing today. Traditionally, organizations spent millions of dollars on preventive technologies, hoping to plug holes or add enough layers and walls to gate attacks. But yet, companies are still getting breached. I mean, look at all these great vendors here. These are all cutting-edge technologies, including some of the greatest next-gen products. So why aren't these technologies working? It's not that these technologies don't work. In my experience, these security solutions typically aren't being used properly. Forrester Research recently reported 64% of the security decision makers say their teams spend too much time on day-to-day tactical activities rather than on actionable incident response. So in other words, we expect our IT department to also be security experts. Who in here is expected to be a security expert that also requires some security IT work? And in the case that you're a CISO or you have a security guy on staff, that guy is expected to also be an expert in every security technology on the market, like Doug. That might have been a reasonable expectation back when we had firewalls and antivirus and that was considered good enough, but not today. Which is also no surprise that Forrester is also reporting 65% of decision makers say finding security professionals with the right skills is a major challenge. Moving tactically doesn't necessarily mean buying that shiny new cybersecurity toy either. Anyone that's recently attended any security conference might notice there's a dizzying array of products that promise to automate the collection and correlation and analysis of everything happening on your network. That's a bold claim. What is often overlooked, most of these solutions require some level of security expertise and knowledge to work as advertised. You can't just plug and play and they work. But Trevor, won't our robot overlords save us? I think our previous speaker alluded to the fact that we're not there yet. The new buzzword, of course, is AI, artificial intelligence. But that's quickly becoming no more than marketing pixie dust. Just sprinkle a little here and there, and boom, your solution has the foresight of a self-driving Tesla with the simplicity of an Amazon Echo. Alexa, prevent cybercrime. The reality, AI is really good at detecting anomalous behavior. However, it also detects 100 other things that need to be checked out, only to later find they weren't attacks. The use of the term AI in security is often misconstrued with the fact that machine learning still requires some level of human feedback to learn what is good and bad. But the problem is we're not always sure what good and bad is because malware programs mask their true nature. You can only automate what you're certain about, and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in cybersecurity. Data doesn't equal information, and information does not equal understanding. Cybersecurity hasn't reached the point where the technology has eliminated the need for the human element. Heather Atkins, she's one of the founding members of Google Security, and she said this recently at TechCrunch. No one is safe from internet attacks, and AI defenses can't help. So despite what you might have read or heard, we just haven't reached the point where the human element is no longer required. And this is coming from Google that has DeepMind. And if you watched the news recently, you've heard the new AlphaGo has achieved another level. If she's saying this, we're a long ways away. And when she was asked, what can we do? If AI is not going to work, what can we do to protect our networks? Her response was, more talent, less technology. Automation does have a place in cybersecurity. But currently its true strengths are in its ability to augment existing detection and response solutions by bringing these tools together to help the human element. Cybersecurity is in transition, and I think this Gartner quote sums it up very nicely. Prevention is futile unless it's tied to a detection and response capability. A mature security program isn't about keeping the breaches out. It's more about how you respond to one. Focusing on how the breach, while occurs, is very important. It's often nearly as important to how you respond to a breach to minimize that ripple effect. I think we all can agree there's no silver bullets when it comes to cybersecurity. But that's okay because hopefully werewolves and coyotes aren't part of your threat model anyway. However, detecting threats as soon as possible and taking the appropriate action to attempt to minimize the damage is as close to a silver bullet in InfoSec as you're going to find today. I often get asked, what's the best security approach? I usually respond with this leading question. Is your security solution a force multiplier or force divider? I've come across many solutions, I can't tell you how many I've tested and seen in action, that are actually really good, but ultimately they end up creating more work for the IT staff than actually making their job easier. Who hasn't found a solution like that? You bought this shiny new toy, man, this is cool, and then all of a sudden your workload triples. I see a few heads nodding. Most of those solutions require very specific security expertise to actually operate the solution and to monitor and manage everything for that given network. The most effective solutions are the ones that combine people, process, and technology together. which optimizes resources as a force multiplier, not a force divider. So now you might be wondering, all right, Trevor, what does a force multiplier solution even look like? I'm glad you asked. But first, let's talk about who's seen this first before I... Few hands? Okay, good. More hands every time. So this is the NIST cybersecurity framework. This framework was designed by hundreds of the country's most expert cybersecurity professionals over the past several years. This framework enables organizations, regardless of size or degree of risk, to apply best practices to risk management and to help improve your own security posture. And just like the coyotes adapting to the modern urban landscape, this framework is the single best approach to the ever-changing cyber threat landscape. And judging by all the vendors in here, they fit many of the categories on this cyber framework. So you likely have some of these in place already today. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. However, I do want to draw your attention to the detection and response category. This is one of the most important categories in the entire framework, in my opinion, that companies are underinvesting in. I can't tell you how many companies will buy a bunch of prevention technologies and they don't worry about the detect and respond. You don't invest in this one, it's almost pointless to have anything in place. You're going to get compromised, as proof by the breach numbers increasing year over year. Heck, Equifax is the current poster child for neglecting this entire category, both of them. And arguably, they butchered the last one, too. Arguably, yeah. So, this is what we know today. Data breaches will continue. You should proactively plan for the breach ripple effects. Without a silver bullet technology, people are still the critical piece of the security puzzle. Your InfoSec should take a page and a lesson from the coyotes and continuously adapt in the same way hackers are adapting to InfoSec. Now, that we all know a little bit more about coyotes and their abilities to adapt, now is a good time to review your own security maturity model and adapt it accordingly. Because security isn't something that you buy, it's something that you do. Thank you.